The anger you're holding onto is only hurting you. Introduction. The poison we learn to protect anger feels powerful. That is why so many people hold onto it for years. Sometimes for entire lifetimes. Because anger creates an illusion of strength. It feels safer to be angry than hurt. Safer to rage than grieve. Safer to blame than feel broken. So the nervous system chooses anger as emotional protection. But most people never realize something devastating. The anger they protect so fiercely is often destroying them from the inside. Slowly. Quietly. Psychologically. Physically. Emotionally. Human beings rarely carry anger alone. Underneath anger usually exists something deeper: betrayal, humiliation, abandonment, rejection, grief, helplessness, heartbreak, disappointment. But vulnerability feels dangerous to wounded people, especially in a world that rewards emotional hardness. So pain transforms into rage. The person stops saying, "I am hurt," and starts saying, "I am angry." Because anger feels more powerful, more protective, more emotionally survivable. This transformation happens everywhere. A child ignored emotionally grows into an adult full of hidden resentment. A betrayed partner develops emotional walls. A humiliated teenager becomes emotionally defensive. A person repeatedly disrespected slowly becomes bitter. Over time, anger becomes identity. The person no longer remembers who they were before the resentment. This is one of the most dangerous psychological effects of unresolved anger. It slowly reshapes personality. Not all at once. Gradually. The angry person often becomes emotionally reactive, impatient, defensive, cynical, hypervigilant, emotionally distant, distrustful, exhausted internally, and because the anger feels justified. They rarely question its long-term effect. That is the trap. Most anger begins with real pain, real betrayal, real disappointment, real emotional wounds. But eventually, the anger stops punishing the past and starts poisoning the present. The nervous system was never designed to carry chronic emotional hostility for years. Yet millions of people wake up every day reliving old emotional battles internally. Replaying arguments. Imagining revenge. Remembering disrespect. Reopening wounds mentally. Again and again. The body responds as though danger is still happening now. Stress hormones rise. Muscles tighten. Sleep weakens. Anxiety increases. Emotional regulation collapses. The person becomes trapped in survival mode psychologically. And survival mode changes perception. The angry nervous system begins seeing threats everywhere. Neutral situations feel personal. Disagreement feels like attack. Small frustrations trigger disproportionate reactions. Why? Because unresolved anger keeps the nervous system emotionally armed, constantly prepared for danger. This creates emotional exhaustion. But many people confuse emotional intensity with emotional strength. They think, if I let go, they win. If I stop being angry, what they did becomes acceptable. My anger protects me. But unresolved anger rarely protects people long-term. More often, it imprisons them. Because the mind stays emotionally attached to the source of pain, the person continues suffering internally long after the original event ended. This is why resentment becomes psychologically addictive. Not because anger feels good, but because anger creates temporary emotional control. The nervous system feels, at least I still have power. Especially after betrayal, humiliation, rejection. But this power is unstable. Because it depends on remaining emotionally connected to pain. And eventually, anger becomes exhausting to maintain. Many angry people secretly feel tired. Not physically. Emotionally tired. Tired of replaying memories, carrying resentment, distrusting everyone, staying emotionally guarded, feeling constantly reactive, but letting go feels terrifying too. Why? Because many people built identity around their wounds. The pain became part of who they are. Without the anger, they fear emptiness, vulnerability, grief, sadness. This is why healing anger requires courage, not passive positivity. Real courage. The courage to finally face the pain underneath the rage. Because underneath many angry people exists a deeply wounded nervous system that never truly felt safe. Safe to feel. Safe to trust. Safe to grieve. Safe to be vulnerable. So anger became armor. And armor always feels necessary until the nervous system learns safety again. Modern culture also feeds anger constantly. Social media rewards outrage. News profits from emotional stimulation. Algorithms amplify division. People now consume anger daily like emotional fuel. And the nervous system adapts accordingly. Many individuals are no longer simply angry at personal experiences. They are angry all the time. At strangers, politics, society, success, failure, themselves. The nervous system becomes addicted to emotional activation. Calmness begins feeling unfamiliar. Stillness feels uncomfortable. Peace feels almost suspicious. This is why many people struggle deeply when life finally becomes quiet. Without constant emotional stimulation, they must finally face themselves. And often, what they discover underneath the anger is sadness they never processed. Loneliness, fear, heartbreak, emotional abandonment. This realization changes everything, because healing anger is not merely about staying calm. It is about understanding the emotional wound beneath the reaction. The nervous system must learn. I no longer need rage to survive emotionally. That process takes honesty, self-awareness, emotional responsibility, and most importantly, the willingness to stop feeding pain as identity. This does not mean pretending bad experiences never happened. It does not mean tolerating abuse, avoiding boundaries, or becoming emotionally weak. Healthy people still feel anger. Anger itself is not evil. Anger can reveal injustice, violated boundaries, emotional truth, unmet needs. But healthy anger moves through the nervous system. Unhealthy anger lives there permanently. That difference changes entire lives. The goal of healing is not becoming emotionless. It is becoming free. Free from emotional imprisonment. Free from resentment loops. Free from carrying old pain into every new experience. Because eventually, every person faces the same difficult question: how much of my life will I sacrifice to wounds that already happened? And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the anger you keep feeding every day rarely hurts the people who wounded you most. It slowly hurts the nervous system carrying it. Chapter 1. Anger is often unhealed pain in disguise. Most angry people are not truly angry. They are hurt. But hurt feels vulnerable, and vulnerability terrifies wounded nervous systems. So pain changes form. Sadness becomes rage, rejection becomes bitterness, humiliation becomes aggression, abandonment becomes emotional hardness. The person stops feeling emotionally wounded, and starts feeling emotionally armed. This is one of the deepest psychological truths about anger. Anger is often pain wearing armor. Human beings rarely become emotionally reactive without reason. Underneath explosive reactions usually exists something unresolved. Something the nervous system never fully processed. Perhaps a childhood full of criticism, emotional neglect, betrayal, rejection, humiliation, abandonment, powerlessness, chronic invalidation. These experiences leave emotional imprints on the nervous system. And when wounds remain unhealed, anger becomes protection. Because anger creates the illusion of strength. A person who feels powerless emotionally often clings to rage because rage feels powerful temporarily. It creates energy, intensity, control. For a brief moment, the person no longer feels helpless. This is why emotionally wounded people often react disproportionately to small situations. The present moment activates old emotional pain. A simple disagreement suddenly feels like disrespect. A delayed text feels like abandonment. Criticism feels like humiliation. Being ignored feels emotionally devastating. Why? Because the nervous system is not reacting only to the present. It is reacting to accumulated emotional history. This explains why some people become intensely defensive so quickly. The reaction is rarely about one moment alone. It is about years of unresolved emotional experiences stored underneath consciousness. Psychologists often describe this as emotional triggering. But most people misunderstand triggers completely. A trigger is not proof someone else made you angry. A trigger reveals where emotional pain already exists internally. The external event simply touches the wound. And wounded nervous systems react automatically. This is why healing anger requires emotional honesty, not just behavioral control. Because controlling reactions without understanding the pain underneath changes very little long-term. The nervous system remains wounded beneath the surface. Eventually, the pain leaks out again. Often through irritation, sarcasm, emotional shutdown, passive aggression, resentment, explosive reactions, bitterness, cynicism. Many people live this way for years without realizing their anger is actually grief that never received space to exist safely. This is especially common in people raised around emotional invalidation. Children quickly learn which emotions feel acceptable in their environment. In many homes, sadness is mocked, fear is ignored, vulnerability is punished, emotional needs are dismissed, but anger is often tolerated more easily. Especially for boys and men. A young boy may hear, "Stop crying. Be strong. Don't be weak." So the nervous system adapts. The child learns, sadness is unsafe, vulnerability is shameful, but anger creates power. Over time, anger becomes the primary emotional language. The adult no longer knows how to express hurt directly. Everything transforms into frustration or rage automatically. This creates emotionally disconnected lives. The person feels anger constantly, without understanding what exists underneath it. But beneath many angry people lives deep heartbreak. Heartbreak from never feeling understood, never feeling emotionally safe, never feeling fully valued, never learning healthy emotional regulation. The tragedy is, many people spend their entire lives protecting wounds they never fully acknowledged. Instead of healing pain, they build identity around it. This creates chronic emotional survival mode. The nervous system remains hyper alert, emotionally guarded, prepared for attack, prepared for disappointment, prepared for betrayal. This constant emotional vigilance exhausts the body and mind over time. Because human beings were never designed to stay emotionally armored forever. Armor protects, but it also isolates. The angry person often struggles with trust, intimacy, vulnerability, emotional closeness, inner peace. Why? Because unresolved pain makes openness feel dangerous. The nervous system believes, if I lower my guard, I will be hurt again. So anger becomes protection against future pain. But protection eventually becomes prison. This is why many chronically angry people secretly feel lonely. Not because they do not want connection, but because unresolved wounds make connection feel unsafe psychologically. The nervous system confuses closeness with vulnerability. And vulnerability feels threatening. So the person pushes others away emotionally. Sometimes subtly. Sometimes aggressively. But underneath the hardness often exists a desperate desire to feel safe, understood, and emotionally accepted. This contradiction creates enormous internal conflict. The person wants love, but fears trust. Wants connection, but fears vulnerability. Wants peace, but remains addicted to emotional defense. This is the exhausting cycle of unresolved anger. Modern society worsens this dramatically. People are rewarded for emotional hardness, sarcasm, detachment, dominance, outrage. Meanwhile, emotional openness is often perceived as weakness. So wounded individuals become even more emotionally defended. The nervous system learns, softness is dangerous. But emotionally healthy people understand something powerful. Softness and weakness are not the same thing. Real emotional strength includes the ability to feel pain honestly without turning every wound into permanent rage. This does not mean tolerating abuse or becoming passive. Healthy anger still matters. Anger can protect boundaries, expose injustice, reveal emotional truth. But healthy anger moves through the nervous system. It does not become identity. Unhealed anger stays trapped inside the body for years. And trapped emotion changes personality slowly. The person becomes emotionally reactive, distrustful, bitter, exhausted, disconnected from joy, not because they are bad people, because unresolved pain slowly reshaped their nervous system. This is why healing anger requires compassion toward yourself first. Not self-hatred. Not shame. Many angry people secretly hate themselves for being reactive. But shame rarely heals emotional wounds. Understanding does. The goal is not asking, "Why am I so angry?" The deeper question is, what pain inside me still feels unseen, unsafe, or unresolved? That question changes everything. Because the moment anger is understood as woundedness rather than identity, healing finally becomes possible. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: many people spend years trying to control their anger, without realizing the anger was never the deepest wound to begin with. Chapter 2. The addiction to being right. Anger often survives because the ego refuses to let go. Not because the pain is still happening, but because the mind became emotionally attached to the story surrounding the pain. The story says, "I was wronged. They destroyed me. I deserved better. They were the problem. I am right to stay angry." And sometimes, those statements are true. People do betray, manipulate, abandon, humiliate, lie. Real harm exists. But unresolved anger becomes dangerous when the nervous system starts building identity around moral superiority. This is where pain slowly transforms into ego attachment. The person no longer only wants healing. They want emotional victory. They want validation, revenge, apology, recognition, proof that they were right. And until that happens, the nervous system refuses to release the resentment. This creates psychological imprisonment. Because healing becomes dependent on external behavior, the person unconsciously says, "I cannot move on until they finally understand what they did." But life rarely gives perfect emotional closure. Many people never apologize sincerely. Some never change. Some never even realize the damage they caused. And waiting forever for emotional justice traps the nervous system in chronic suffering. This is why many people stay emotionally stuck for years. Not because healing is impossible, but because the ego became addicted to the emotional identity of being wronged. Victimhood can become psychologically comforting in subtle ways. Not because suffering feels good. Because suffering creates identity. The person knows exactly who they are inside the emotional story: the betrayed one, the rejected one, the abandoned one, the misunderstood one. And strangely, identity, even painful identity, can feel safer than uncertainty. Letting go threatens the ego because letting go means releasing the emotional role the person has carried for years. Without the resentment, who are they? Without the anger, what remains? This fear keeps many people emotionally attached to pain. The mind continues replaying conversations, betrayals, disrespect, rejection, humiliating memories again and again. Why? Because rumination creates temporary emotional certainty. The nervous system keeps revisiting the wound, searching for control, searching for meaning, searching for resolution. But endless mental replay never heals emotional pain. It deepens it. The body keeps reliving the experience neurologically as though it is still happening now. This is why some people remain emotionally trapped in events that happened decades earlier. The nervous system never truly left the emotional battlefield. One of the strongest reinforcements of chronic anger is the addiction to moral superiority. When someone hurts us deeply, anger often creates a feeling of righteousness. The person thinks, I would never do what they did. I am better than them. They are terrible. I deserve justice. Again, sometimes these reactions are understandable. But psychologically, moral superiority creates emotional rigidity. The ego becomes attached to being the good one. And once identity attaches to righteousness, forgiveness begins feeling threatening. Because forgiveness feels like surrendering emotional superiority. This is why many people secretly resist healing. Not consciously. Subconsciously. Because anger makes them feel morally powerful. Especially after experiences where they once felt powerless. The nervous system clings to resentment because resentment creates emotional structure. Without it, unresolved grief surfaces underneath. And grief feels far more vulnerable than anger. Anger energizes. Grief softens. Anger creates movement. Grief creates stillness. Most wounded nervous systems would rather stay emotionally activated than emotionally exposed. So they keep feeding the anger. Social media intensified this addiction dramatically. Modern culture rewards outrage. People now build entire identities around political anger, ideological anger, gender resentment, social resentment, generational resentment. The angrier someone appears, the more attention they often receive. This creates emotional reinforcement loops. The nervous system becomes chemically attached to outrage itself. Every argument, every debate, every conflict creates emotional stimulation. And emotionally wounded people often become addicted to stimulation because stillness would force them to face unresolved pain underneath. This is why calmness can feel uncomfortable for chronically angry people. Peace feels unfamiliar. Without anger, they suddenly feel sadness, loneliness, emptiness, grief. The emotions the rage was protecting them from all along. This realization changes everything. Many people are not addicted to anger itself. They are addicted to avoiding vulnerability. The ego plays a major role in this avoidance. The ego wants certainty, control, superiority, validation. Healing requires the opposite: humility, emotional honesty, surrender, acceptance, vulnerability. And vulnerability feels psychologically terrifying when identity has been built around emotional defense for years. This is why truly healing anger requires letting go of the fantasy that pain can be reversed through emotional obsession. No amount of replaying the betrayal changes the past. No amount of hatred rewrites history. No amount of resentment repairs the nervous system. Eventually, emotionally mature people realize something painful. Staying angry does not keep you connected to justice. It often keeps you connected to suffering. That realization creates emotional freedom. Not because the past suddenly becomes acceptable, but because the nervous system finally understands. I do not want my identity chained to pain forever. This does not mean becoming passive or pretending nothing happened. Healthy people still maintain boundaries, protect themselves, recognize toxic behavior. But they stop organizing their entire emotional life around resentment. Because resentment slowly consumes identity. The angry person eventually talks about the betrayal, the disrespect, the pain, the unfairness. So often that the wound becomes their primary emotional reality. This affects relationships, communication, self-image, emotional health, nervous system regulation. Everything becomes filtered through unresolved emotional history. But healing begins when someone asks, do I want to spend the rest of my life emotionally attached to the people who hurt me? That question creates awareness. Because everyday resentment continues. Part of the nervous system remains emotionally controlled by the past. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: sometimes the hardest part of healing anger is not releasing the pain. It is releasing the identity built around being the wounded one. Chapter 3. Your nervous system was never meant to live in constant rage. The human body was built to survive danger, not to live inside it permanently. But unresolved anger traps the nervous system in continuous emotional threat. And over time, the body begins paying the price. Most people think anger exists only in the mind. It does not. Anger lives in the nervous system, in breathing patterns, muscle tension, hormones, heart rate, sleep quality, digestion, energy levels. The body remembers emotional pain even when the mind tries to ignore it. This is why chronic anger becomes physically exhausting. The nervous system was designed for temporary activation. When danger appears, the body releases stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. These chemicals prepare the body for survival. Heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Focus narrows. The body becomes alert and defensive. This system is incredibly useful during real danger. But modern emotional pain often keeps the system activated for years. Not because physical danger still exists. Because emotional danger never fully resolved internally. The nervous system cannot always distinguish between a real physical threat and emotionally relived pain, so every time resentment is replayed mentally, the body reacts again. The argument happened years ago, yet the nervous system still prepares for war. This creates chronic survival mode. And survival mode changes the entire personality slowly. The person becomes irritable, impatient, emotionally reactive, hypervigilant, exhausted, mentally overwhelmed, not because they are weak. Because the body was never designed for endless emotional warfare. Many angry people wake up already tense. The nervous system never fully rests. Even during sleep, the body remains psychologically guarded. This affects sleep quality, immune function, digestion, concentration, emotional regulation, hormonal balance. The body slowly begins deteriorating under chronic stress. But because emotional survival becomes normalized, many people stop recognizing how dysregulated they truly feel. Constant tension becomes familiar. And familiar suffering often feels normal. This is one of the most dangerous aspects of chronic anger. The nervous system adapts to emotional chaos. The person becomes so accustomed to stress that calmness feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels strange. Peace feels unfamiliar. Why? Because the body became chemically conditioned for activation. Many chronically angry individuals unconsciously seek stimulation constantly. Arguments, conflict, outrage, drama, emotional intensity. Not because they consciously enjoy suffering. Because the nervous system became addicted to heightened arousal states. Calmness feels emotionally empty at first. This is why some people sabotage peaceful situations unconsciously. Healthy relationships feel boring. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stability feels unfamiliar. The nervous system equates emotional intensity with emotional aliveness. This often begins in childhood. Children raised in chaotic environments adapt neurologically to unpredictability. Constant tension becomes baseline. So adulthood nervous systems remain hyper-alert even when danger no longer exists. The body keeps scanning. Tone changes, facial expressions, possible rejection, emotional shifts, conflict signals. This creates exhaustion. Hypervigilance consumes enormous psychological energy. The person rarely feels fully safe internally. And without internal safety, true peace becomes difficult. Many angry people are not simply emotionally reactive. They are physiologically dysregulated. Their body remains trapped in defensive activation. This explains why some individuals explode emotionally over seemingly small situations. The reaction is not only psychological. It is neurological overload. The nervous system already carried accumulated stress before the trigger appeared. Then one small event overwhelms emotional capacity completely. Afterward, shame often follows. The person thinks, "Why did I react like that? Why can't I control myself? Why am I always angry?" But shame rarely heals nervous system dysregulation. Understanding does. Because healing anger requires calming the body, not merely suppressing emotion mentally. Suppression often worsens the problem. Many people believe emotional strength means ignore feelings. Stay hard. Push emotions down. But suppressed anger does not disappear. It remains stored physiologically, often emerging later through anxiety, panic, emotional numbness, depression, chronic irritability, physical tension, burnout. The body eventually demands release. This is why emotionally disconnected people often experience unexplained exhaustion. The nervous system is carrying emotional weight the conscious mind never fully processed. Modern life intensifies this dramatically. Most people now live inside constant stimulation, news outrage, social media conflict, financial stress, comparison culture, emotional overload, endless noise. The nervous system rarely experiences true recovery. There is always another reason to stay emotionally activated. Another argument. Another crisis. Another outrage cycle. People are emotionally consuming stress all day long, and the body absorbs every bit of it. This creates a culture of chronically dysregulated nervous systems. Many individuals no longer remember what genuine inner calm feels like. Their body became accustomed to emotional survival. This affects relationships deeply too. A dysregulated nervous system struggles with patience, vulnerability, intimacy, emotional safety, communication. The person becomes reactive instead of responsive. Small frustrations trigger disproportionate emotional reactions. Loved ones begin walking on eggshells. The angry individual often feels misunderstood, while others feel emotionally unsafe around them. This creates isolation. Not because the person lacks love, because unresolved nervous system activation slowly damages connection. Healing requires understanding something profound. Peace is physiological before it becomes emotional. The body must relearn safety, relearn stillness, relearn regulation. This process takes time because the nervous system adapts slowly, especially after years of emotional defense. Many people want instant healing. But nervous systems shaped by chronic anger cannot immediately relax simply because the mind decides to let go. The body needs evidence that safety exists now. This requires rest, emotional honesty, healthy boundaries, self-awareness, slower living, emotional processing, nervous system regulation. Healing is not weakness. It is biological repair. The angry nervous system has often spent years preparing for attack. Eventually, the body becomes exhausted from carrying emotional armor continuously. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the longer anger lives inside the nervous system, the more the body begins treating emotional survival as normal life itself. Chapter 4. Most angry people are secretly heartbroken. Anger is loud. Heartbreak is quiet. That is why many people choose anger instead. Because heartbreak feels unbearable to face directly. It feels vulnerable, heavy, exposing. Anger, however, creates movement, intensity, protection. The nervous system often prefers rage over grief because grief requires surrender. And wounded people rarely feel safe enough to surrender emotionally. So they stay angry, sometimes for years. But underneath many chronically angry people exists deep emotional heartbreak that was never fully processed. Heartbreak from betrayal, abandonment, rejection, emotional neglect, humiliation, disappointment, unmet emotional needs. The person may not even consciously recognize the sadness anymore. The nervous system converted the pain into emotional defense long ago. This transformation happens slowly. A child who never felt emotionally seen grows emotionally hard. A teenager repeatedly humiliated becomes defensive. A betrayed partner becomes distrustful. A rejected person becomes bitter. Over time, anger becomes emotional armor protecting unresolved grief underneath. This is why many angry individuals react so strongly to emotional vulnerability. Vulnerability threatens the armor. And without the armor, the pain underneath becomes visible again. This feels terrifying psychologically, especially for people taught that emotional softness equals weakness. Many individuals, especially men, grow up learning, do not cry, do not look weak, Handle it yourself. Be strong. But often, being strong actually means suppress your emotional pain until it transforms into anger. This creates emotionally disconnected adults. Adults who know how to work, achieve, perform, survive, but do not know how to grieve, process pain, express sadness, feel emotionally safe. The nervous system eventually loses emotional flexibility. Everything painful becomes frustration instead. The person says, "I'm angry." But underneath the anger is often, "I feel abandoned. I feel unloved. I feel invisible. I feel emotionally unsafe." These emotions are much harder to admit. Because sadness feels powerless, anger feels powerful. This is why emotionally wounded people sometimes become emotionally cold. Not because they lack feelings. Because they feel too much internally. And emotional numbness becomes self-protection. Many angry people secretly fear tenderness. Real tenderness. The kind that requires openness, trust, emotional exposure. Because tenderness risks heartbreak again. So the nervous system chooses emotional distance instead. This creates people who deeply desire love, while simultaneously fearing emotional closeness. The contradiction becomes painful. The person wants connection, but distrusts vulnerability, wants intimacy, but fears emotional dependence, wants peace, but remains emotionally guarded. This creates chronic loneliness, even inside relationships. Many angry individuals do not realize how isolated they truly feel internally. Because anger keeps the nervous system emotionally defended constantly. Defense prevents closeness. And without closeness, heartbreak never fully heals. The body simply carries it silently. This often appears through emotional shutdown. Some people stop expressing feelings altogether. Not because the pain disappeared. Because expressing pain once felt dangerous. Perhaps they were mocked, ignored, invalidated, rejected. So the nervous system adapted. Never show weakness again. This creates emotional armor. But armor blocks both pain and love simultaneously. That is the tragedy. The same walls protecting someone from future hurt also prevent genuine emotional intimacy. Eventually, many angry people become emotionally exhausted from carrying constant defense. Always guarded. Always suspicious. Always prepared for disappointment. The nervous system never fully relaxes. This exhaustion often appears as irritability, cynicism, emotional numbness, isolation, burnout, loss of joy. The person stops feeling emotionally alive, not because life became empty. Because unresolved heartbreak slowly disconnected them from softness internally. Social media worsens this dramatically. Modern culture glorifies emotional hardness, detachment, sarcasm, dominance, not caring, emotional superiority. Meanwhile, genuine emotional vulnerability is often ridiculed. So wounded people retreat further into emotional armor. They learn how to appear unbothered, while silently carrying enormous pain underneath. Many people become experts at hiding heartbreak behind anger. They joke, work constantly, stay distracted, argue online, remain emotionally unavailable, anything to avoid sitting quietly with grief. Because grief demands honesty. It forces the nervous system to acknowledge, I was hurt deeply. That realization is difficult for emotionally defended people, especially those who build identity around strength. But true healing begins the moment someone stops asking, why am I so angry? And starts asking, what heartbreak inside me still needs compassion? That question changes everything. Because compassion softens the nervous system. Not weakness. Compassion. Most angry people secretly need understanding more than judgment. Not excuses for harmful behavior, but understanding of the emotional pain driving the behavior. Shame rarely heals heartbreak. Safety does. The nervous system must finally feel safe enough to lower emotional armor gradually. Safe enough to grieve, cry, Feel sadness, process rejection, acknowledge loneliness, admit emotional wounds. This is incredibly difficult for people who spent years surviving through emotional hardness. But emotional hardness is not peace. It is survival. Peace comes when the nervous system no longer needs constant defense to feel safe. This does not mean becoming emotionally fragile or naive. Healthy people still maintain boundaries, recognize danger, protect themselves wisely. But they no longer confuse emotional numbness with strength. Real strength includes emotional openness. The ability to remain soft without becoming self-destructive. The ability to feel deeply without collapsing. The ability to love without losing yourself. Many angry people never learned this balance. So they live trapped between emotional hunger and emotional defense, wanting connection, while fearing it simultaneously. This creates internal suffering few people truly understand. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: beneath many angry personalities exists a heart that was hurt so deeply. The nervous system decided it was safer to stay armored than to risk feeling that pain again. Chapter 5. Revenge never heals the nervous system. Revenge is one of the oldest emotional fantasies in human psychology. The mind imagines, if they suffer the way I suffered, maybe I will finally feel peace. This belief feels emotionally convincing, especially after betrayal, humiliation, abandonment. The nervous system desperately wants emotional balance restored. When someone wounds us deeply, the body reacts as though something sacred was violated. Trust, safety, dignity, love, and anger immediately searches for resolution. Sometimes that resolution becomes revenge. Not always physical revenge. Often emotional revenge. The desire to humiliate them back, reject them first, make them regret losing you, prove your worth, watch them suffer, emotionally punish them. The mind becomes obsessed with emotional repayment, because pain feels unfair, and the nervous system struggles deeply with unresolved unfairness. This is why people replay fantasies of confrontation repeatedly, imaginary arguments, perfect revenge speeches, scenarios where the other person finally realizes their mistake. The nervous system believes, once they understand my pain, I will finally feel free. But this rarely happens. Because revenge does not heal wounded emotional systems. It temporarily stimulates them. There is a huge difference. Revenge creates short-term emotional intensity. Healing creates long-term nervous system peace. Most people confuse the two. This is why revenge fantasies often become addictive psychologically. They create temporary feelings of power, control, superiority, emotional justice. Especially for people who once felt powerless. The nervous system says, now I am no longer weak. But underneath revenge still lives unresolved pain. The wound remains untouched. Because punishment cannot repair emotional injury internally. It only redirects suffering outward temporarily. And often, revenge deepens emotional attachment to the original pain. The person becomes psychologically chained to the source of hurt, thinking about them constantly, monitoring them, comparing lives, wanting validation, wanting emotional collapse from the other person. The nervous system remains emotionally connected through resentment. This is why some people cannot move on for years. Not because the event itself still controls their life. Because emotional obsession continues feeding the connection. Hatred can emotionally attach people just as strongly as love. Sometimes even more strongly. Because intense emotions create powerful neurological loops. The angry mind keeps searching. How do I win emotionally? But emotional healing is not victory over another person. It is freedom from psychological imprisonment. Many people never realize revenge keeps the wound alive. Every replay, every fantasy, every emotional argument inside the mind strengthens the neural pathway connected to pain. The body keeps reliving the injury repeatedly. This creates emotional exhaustion. And eventually, the person becomes consumed by bitterness. Not because they are evil, Because unresolved hurt slowly became identity. Some individuals dedicate years trying to prove something to the people who hurt them. Success becomes revenge. Detachment becomes revenge. Relationships become revenge. Appearance becomes revenge. The nervous system remains emotionally controlled by the original wound. Even achievement becomes psychologically tied to pain. This creates fragile fulfillment. Because when identity revolves around proving others wrong, peace never fully arrives. The nervous system stays dependent on external emotional outcomes. True healing begins when someone asks, "What if I stopped building my future around my past pain?" That question changes everything. Because revenge-oriented living keeps the nervous system trapped in emotional survival mode. The body remains prepared for conflict constantly. And conflict slowly consumes inner peace. This does not mean anger itself is wrong. Healthy anger can motivate boundaries, self-protection, justice, leaving unhealthy environments, personal growth. But healthy anger eventually moves forward. Unhealthy anger stays emotionally frozen in the past. There is another painful truth many people avoid. Revenge rarely creates the emotional satisfaction people imagine. Sometimes the other person never changes, never apologizes, never suffers visibly. And if emotional healing depends entirely on their suffering, the nervous system remains trapped forever. This realization is devastating initially, because it forces emotional responsibility inward. The person must finally accept, my healing cannot depend on another person's punishment. That is one of the hardest psychological lessons in adulthood, especially for deeply wounded people. Forgiveness becomes misunderstood here. Many believe forgiveness means excusing behavior, allowing abuse, pretending nothing happened, reconciling with harmful people. It does not. Forgiveness, psychologically, often means, I no longer want this pain controlling my nervous system every day. That is completely different. Forgiveness is not always about the other person. Sometimes it is about ending internal emotional warfare. The nervous system becomes exhausted from carrying hatred constantly. Many chronically angry individuals secretly feel tired. Tired of replaying betrayal. Tired of emotional defense. Tired of bitterness. Tired of carrying old pain into every new experience. But letting go feels frightening because resentment creates identity and emotional certainty. Without the hatred, the person must finally face grief underneath. And grief feels vulnerable. Sadness feels vulnerable. Heartbreak feels vulnerable. Anger protects people from those emotions temporarily. But protection eventually becomes prison. This is why emotional healing requires enormous courage. The courage to stop feeding fantasies of revenge long enough to finally ask, what pain inside me still needs healing? That question shifts the focus completely. The goal is no longer emotional domination over others. The goal becomes nervous system peace. And peace feels very different than revenge. Peace is quiet, stable, grounded. It does not require another person to lose. It only requires the nervous system to stop reliving emotional war repeatedly. Many people spend years trying to punish others emotionally, while unknowingly punishing themselves daily in the process. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: revenge may satisfy the ego briefly, but it rarely gives the nervous system the healing it was truly searching for. Chapter 6. The people who hurt you often created themselves through pain too. One of the hardest emotional truths to accept is this: people who hurt others are often deeply wounded themselves. Not always. Some people are cruel consciously, manipulative intentionally, abusive deliberately. Pain does not excuse harmful behavior. But many emotionally damaging people were once emotionally damaged children. And unresolved pain tends to repeat itself across generations. This is how emotional trauma survives through families, relationships, and entire societies. A child raised without emotional safety often grows into an adult who cannot provide emotional safety. A person raised around rage may normalize rage. Someone emotionally neglected may struggle to recognize emotional needs in others. A child who never learned healthy love may confuse control, fear, or emotional distance with love later in life. The cycle continues unconsciously. This is one of the most tragic aspects of human psychology. Wounded people often recreate the very pain they once suffered. Not because they consciously want to destroy others. Because unresolved pain shapes nervous systems invisibly. The body adapts to survival patterns early. And survival patterns eventually become personality. This is why emotionally immature people often hurt others without fully understanding the damage they cause. Their nervous system may never have learned emotional regulation, empathy, accountability, healthy communication, emotional safety, vulnerability. Instead, they learn survival, avoidance, control, emotional shutdown, manipulation, aggression, defensiveness. These behaviors often begin as protection mechanisms. But over time, protection becomes destruction. Many people never heal the wounds they inherited emotionally. So they unconsciously pass them forward. A father raised through humiliation humiliates his son. A neglected mother becomes emotionally unavailable. A betrayed partner becomes controlling. A chronically criticized child becomes an angry adult. Pain travels through people when it remains unprocessed. Understanding this changes anger profoundly. Because eventually, emotionally mature individuals realize, some people hurt you from their unresolved wounds, not from your lack of worth. That realization can feel deeply emotional, especially for those who spent years believing, maybe I deserved the mistreatment. Maybe I was not lovable enough. Maybe something is wrong with me. But emotionally damaged people often hurt even those they genuinely love. Because love alone does not heal emotional dysfunction automatically. A person can love you and still lack emotional maturity, still lack self-awareness, still lack regulation, still repeat destructive patterns. This does not make the pain less real, but it changes interpretation. The nervous system slowly stops personalizing every wound completely. Instead of, I was hurt because I am worthless, the person begins understanding, I was hurt by someone who was emotionally wounded themselves. This creates space for compassion, not permission for abuse. Compassion and tolerance are not the same thing. This distinction matters deeply. Many people fear compassion because they think compassion means excusing behavior, removing accountability, reconnecting with toxic people, abandoning boundaries. It does not. Healthy compassion simply means understanding human pain without allowing it to destroy you further. You can recognize someone's wounds and still protect yourself from their behavior. Emotionally mature people understand both truths simultaneously. They were hurting, and they still hurt me. Both can exist together. This balanced understanding prevents two dangerous extremes: blind hatred, naive self-sacrifice. Without understanding, anger hardens into bitterness. Without boundaries, compassion becomes self-destruction. Healing requires both wisdom and softness. Many wounded individuals unconsciously search for emotionally unavailable people repeatedly. Why? Because the nervous system recreates familiar emotional environments, even painful ones. Someone raised around inconsistency may unconsciously feel attracted to inconsistent partners. Someone raised around criticism may normalize emotional invalidation. The nervous system often confuses familiarity with safety. This is why unresolved childhood pain shapes adult relationships so powerfully. People repeat emotional patterns until awareness interrupts them. And awareness begins when someone stops asking, why do people always hurt me? And starts asking, what emotional environments has my nervous system normalized? That question changes everything. Because healing requires breaking unconscious cycles. Otherwise, pain simply moves from one relationship to another, one generation to the next, one wounded nervous system into another. Modern culture rarely teaches emotional healing deeply. Most people inherit emotional patterns without questioning them. Families pass down shame, rage, emotional suppression avoidance, fear control hypercriticism. As though these are normal ways to exist. Children absorb emotional environments long before they understand them intellectually. The nervous system learns survival emotionally first. This is why emotionally immature adults often seem trapped inside reactive behavior patterns. They are operating from old survival conditioning. Again, this does not excuse harm. But understanding humanizes the pain. And humanizing pain reduces hatred. Hatred keeps the nervous system trapped emotionally. Understanding softens emotional rigidity. The person slowly realizes, pain created pain. This realization often becomes the beginning of generational healing. Someone finally decides, the suffering stops with me. That decision is powerful. Because emotionally healed people no longer unconsciously spread unresolved pain everywhere. They learn self-awareness, regulation, boundaries, emotional responsibility, compassion, healthy communication. And slowly, the nervous system stops recreating old emotional wars. This process takes courage because it requires confronting inherited wounds honestly. Many people would rather stay angry than examine the deeper emotional patterns shaping their life. Because self-awareness can feel painful initially. But awareness creates freedom. Without awareness, people simply repeat emotional history unconsciously, again and again. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this. Many of the people who hurt you were once wounded people who never learned how to heal before their pain became someone else's pain too. Chapter 7. Anger changes the way you speak, think, and love. Unresolved anger never stays contained inside one emotional corner of life. It spreads into communication, relationships, thought patterns, identity, love. Eventually, the angry nervous system begins shaping how a person experiences the entire world. This happens slowly. So slowly that many people do not notice the transformation happening inside them. At first, anger feels temporary. A reaction to pain. But when resentment remains unresolved for years, it starts changing personality itself. The person becomes emotionally guarded. More suspicious. More reactive. Less trusting. Less patient. The nervous system adapts to emotional survival. And survival mode changes communication profoundly. Angry people often speak defensively without realizing it. Neutral comments feel personal. Questions feel accusatory. Disagreement feels threatening. Why? Because unresolved anger keeps the nervous system hyper alert for disrespect, rejection, or betrayal. The body constantly scans for emotional danger. This creates communication patterns like interrupting, overreacting, sarcasm, passive aggression, emotional shutdown, hostility, excessive defensiveness. Not always because the person wants conflict. Because the nervous system is preparing for attack before attack even exists. This is exhausting for everyone involved. Especially in close relationships. Many angry individuals secretly crave love deeply. But unresolved anger makes receiving love difficult psychologically. Why? Because intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels dangerous to wounded nervous systems. The person unconsciously believes, if I trust fully, I may get hurt again. So emotional walls remain active constantly. The person may struggle to open up, avoid emotional dependence, become controlling, overanalyze behavior, expect betrayal, push people away preemptively. The nervous system prioritizes protection over connection. But protection eventually creates loneliness. This is one of the cruelest effects of unresolved anger. The person often pushes away the very love they desperately want. Not intentionally. Defensively. Relationships become emotionally unstable because anger changes interpretation. A delayed response suddenly feels like rejection. A mistake feels like betrayal. Constructive criticism feels like attack. The nervous system stops responding to reality clearly. It responds through accumulated emotional pain. This creates repeated conflict cycles. The angry person often says, "Nobody understands me." Meanwhile, others feel emotionally unsafe around them. The disconnect grows. Over time, communication becomes emotionally charged even during ordinary moments. Small frustrations trigger disproportionate reactions. Minor misunderstandings escalate quickly. The body reacts as though emotional danger is everywhere. This creates relationship fatigue. Loved ones begin walking carefully around the angry individual, avoiding certain topics, avoiding emotional honesty, avoiding conflict entirely, not because love disappeared. Because emotional volatility creates nervous system tension in everyone nearby. Eventually intimacy weakens. Because emotional safety is essential for closeness. And unresolved anger slowly destroys emotional safety. The person may not realize how deeply fear influences their behavior. Fear of abandonment, disrespect, humiliation, rejection, vulnerability. But fear hidden beneath anger still shapes communication constantly. This also changes internal thought patterns. Chronically angry individuals often develop cynical thinking, distrustful assumptions, negative expectations, emotional pessimism, hypervigilance. The nervous system begins anticipating pain automatically. This affects perception dramatically. The person starts expecting disappointment before connection even begins, expecting betrayal before trust develops, expecting conflict before peace has a chance to exist. Eventually the nervous system forgets how to relax emotionally inside relationships. Love begins feeling unsafe. And when love feels unsafe, people either emotionally withdraw or emotionally control. Both damage intimacy deeply. Some angry people become emotionally distant, cold, detached. Others become possessive and reactive. Both patterns often come from the same wound, fear of emotional pain returning. This is why unresolved anger frequently creates emotional isolation. Even socially successful people may feel deeply alone internally. Because emotional armor blocks authentic closeness. The person cannot be fully known while constantly defending themselves psychologically. And the longer anger survives, the harder softness begins to feel. Compassion weakens. Patience weakens. Empathy weakens. The nervous system becomes emotionally rigid. Everything feels heavier, more threatening, more exhausting. Joy decreases too. This is important. Many people think anger only affects negative emotions. But emotionally, numbness spreads. The nervous system protecting itself from pain often also reduces access to peace, tenderness, spontaneity, emotional warmth, genuine excitement. The person slowly loses emotional aliveness. Not because life became empty. Because emotional defense consumes psychological energy for too long. This often creates shame internally. The angry person may secretly hate who they are becoming. They notice irritability, emotional distance, reactive behavior, damaged relationships, but feel unable to stop fully. Why? Because unresolved pain continues driving the nervous system underneath awareness. This is why healing anger requires more than trying harder. It requires emotional understanding, self-awareness, nervous system regulation, compassion toward the wounded parts underneath the defensiveness. The goal is not becoming passive or emotionless. Healthy people still experience anger. But healthy anger does not dominate identity. It does not control every relationship. It does not poison every conversation. It does not isolate the person emotionally from life itself. Healing begins when someone recognizes, my anger is no longer only protecting me. It is also hurting the people I love, and hurting the person I am becoming. That realization is painful, but powerful. Because awareness creates choice. And choice creates the possibility of transformation. Many people wait for others to change before softening emotionally. But emotional freedom begins internally. The nervous system must slowly learn, I no longer need constant emotional defense to survive connection. This takes time. Especially after years of emotional armor. But without this healing, anger eventually shapes every conversation, every relationship, every emotional experience, until the person no longer recognizes themselves beneath the resentment. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: unresolved anger does not only change how you react to people, it slowly changes how you experience love itself. Chapter 8. Social media feeds your rage for profit. Modern anger is no longer only personal. It is industrialized, manufactured, amplified, monetized. Every day, millions of people wake up and emotionally consume outrage before their nervous system fully wakes up. They open their phones and immediately encounter conflict, political rage, humiliation, arguments, division, fear, comparison, emotional chaos. The nervous system absorbs all of it, and slowly, anger becomes a lifestyle. Most people do not realize this consciously. They believe, "I'm just staying informed. I'm reacting normally. People really are terrible." But modern digital systems are designed to emotionally stimulate the nervous system continuously. Why? Because outrage keeps attention, and attention creates profit. Calm people scroll less. Peaceful people consume less emotional stimulation. Angry people stay engaged. So algorithms learn quickly. Emotional activation increases platform activity. This changes human psychology dramatically. People now live inside emotional environments optimized for nervous system stimulation. Every notification, every argument, every controversy, every public humiliation, the brain receives constant emotional interruption. And over time, the nervous system adapts to outrage as normal emotional baseline. This is incredibly dangerous psychologically, because the body cannot distinguish well between direct emotional threat and emotionally charged digital exposure. The nervous system reacts anyway. Heart rate changes. Stress hormones rise. Emotional vigilance increases. The body enters low-level survival mode repeatedly throughout the day. Most people never fully calm down anymore. Their nervous system stays partially activated constantly. Social media also rewards emotional extremity. Balanced perspectives rarely go viral. Nuance rarely spreads quickly, but outrage spreads instantly. Why? Because emotionally charged content triggers stronger nervous system reactions. Fear, anger, shock, humiliation, moral outrage. These emotions capture attention immediately. The brain evolved to prioritize threat detection. Algorithms exploit this ancient survival wiring continuously. This creates emotionally addicted societies. People begin unconsciously seeking emotional stimulation online. Conflict becomes entertainment. Humiliation becomes content. Hatred becomes identity. And eventually, outrage starts feeling emotionally satisfying. Not because anger creates peace. Because anger creates stimulation. This distinction matters deeply. Many chronically angry people are not emotionally fulfilled. They are emotionally activated. There is a difference. Activation feels intense. Peace feels stable. Modern culture often mistakes intensity for meaning. This is why people become addicted to arguments, comment wars, outrage videos, ideological battles online, humiliation, constant reaction cycles. The nervous system becomes chemically dependent on emotional spikes. Calmness starts feeling boring. Stillness feels uncomfortable. The body begins craving stimulation constantly. This also destroys empathy gradually. When people consume endless outrage content, the nervous system becomes emotionally desensitized. Others stop feeling human. They become enemies, stereotypes, political symbols, targets for projection. Social media encourages simplified emotional thinking. Complex human beings become reduced to categories: good, evil, weak, stupid, dangerous, worthless. This dehumanization feeds collective anger constantly. And angry people are easier to manipulate emotionally, especially when identity becomes attached to outrage. Many people no longer simply hold opinions. Their nervous system builds identity around emotional conflict itself. They wake up searching for something to be angry about. Not consciously. Neurologically. Because the brain adapted to emotional stimulation as psychological fuel. This damages mental health deeply. The body was never designed to process endless exposure to global conflict and emotional chaos daily. Historically, humans experienced stress locally and temporarily. Now people consume worldwide suffering and outrage continuously through screens. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed. This creates emotional fatigue, irritability, anxiety, cynicism, hopelessness, emotional numbness. Many people secretly feel emotionally exhausted, yet continue consuming outrage compulsively. Because outrage addiction functions similarly to other forms of stimulation addiction, the nervous system seeks another emotional spike. Another argument. Another scandal. Another controversy. The cycle repeats endlessly. Social media also intensifies comparison-based anger. People constantly compare success, appearance, relationships, status, happiness. This creates hidden resentment. The nervous system quietly asks, why them? Why not me? Why is my life different? Unprocessed insecurity often transforms into bitterness online. People project personal pain outward through criticism and hostility. This is why emotionally wounded individuals are often the most reactive online. The digital world provides anonymous emotional discharge. The person releases accumulated frustration externally instead of healing it internally. But emotional discharge is not healing. Temporary release without awareness often reinforces emotional patterns instead of resolving them. The nervous system stays trapped in reactivity. Another devastating effect of online outrage culture is identity fragmentation. People begin performing emotional reactions publicly. Outrage becomes social currency. The angrier someone appears, the more attention they often receive. This creates performative rage. The person no longer reacts authentically. They react for validation, belonging, visibility, approval from their group. This weakens emotional self-awareness dramatically. The individual slowly loses connection to their genuine internal emotional state. Everything becomes externalized, reactive, performative. And underneath constant outrage often exists deep unresolved personal pain, loneliness, insecurity, fear, powerlessness, disconnection. But modern culture rarely encourages emotional healing. It encourages emotional broadcasting instead. People express endlessly, without truly processing anything internally. This keeps nervous systems dysregulated for years. Healing requires stepping outside constant emotional stimulation long enough to finally hear yourself again. To notice how tense your body feels, how reactive your thoughts became, how exhausted your nervous system truly is. Many people do not realize how much anger they carry until silence finally arrives. And silence can feel terrifying initially. Because without distraction, the unresolved pain underneath becomes visible. But this awareness is necessary. Because emotionally healthy people protect their nervous systems intentionally. They understand. Not every conflict deserves emotional energy. Not every outrage deserves attention. Not every argument deserves participation. This is emotional maturity. The ability to preserve inner peace in a world designed to emotionally provoke you constantly. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this. Modern systems profit from keeping your nervous system emotionally activated. Because angry people are easier to control than peaceful ones. Chapter 9. The Hard Truth. Nobody is coming to heal you. One of the most painful realizations in emotional healing is this: nobody is coming to save you emotionally. Not completely. Not permanently. Not in the way wounded parts of the nervous system secretly hope. Many people spend years waiting. Waiting for an apology, recognition, justice, closure, validation, understanding, revenge. Someone to finally repair the damage the nervous system believes. Once they admit what they did, maybe I can finally feel peace. But often, that moment never comes. And waiting endlessly keeps emotional power trapped in someone else's hands. This is one of the deepest psychological traps of unresolved anger. Healing becomes emotionally dependent on another person's behavior. The wounded nervous system says, I cannot move on until they change. I cannot heal until they understand. I cannot feel peace until justice happens. But life rarely provides perfect emotional closure. Some people never apologize. Some never grow. Some never acknowledge the damage they caused. Some simply continue living. And this reality feels deeply unfair. Because emotionally, the nervous system wants balance restored. It wants pain recognized. But eventually, healing requires accepting something difficult. Your peace cannot remain dependent on people who already damaged your peace once before. That realization changes everything. Because it shifts emotional responsibility inward. Not blame. Responsibility. There is a difference. Blame says, everything is my fault. Responsibility says, my healing is now my responsibility. This distinction is powerful psychologically. Many wounded people unconsciously remain emotionally tied to the past because they are waiting for emotional permission to heal. Permission through apology. Permission through validation. Permission through acknowledgement. But healing rarely arrives through perfect external resolution. Healing often begins privately. Quietly. Internally. The nervous system must eventually decide, I do not want my future emotionally controlled by unresolved pain anymore. This is hard because anger creates attachment. Even painful attachment still feels emotionally familiar. The person becomes connected to the story, the betrayal, the injustice. The identity of being wounded. Letting go can feel like losing part of yourself. Especially if the pain shaped identity for years. This is why many people stay emotionally stuck long after painful experiences end. The event ended. But the nervous system continues reliving it internally. Again and again. The body keeps waiting for emotional repair from the outside world. But no external event can fully regulate an internally wounded nervous system permanently. Not success. Not revenge. Not validation. Not relationships. Inner healing must eventually become internal work. This truth feels harsh initially. Especially for deeply wounded people. Because many individuals secretly want someone to finally arrive and say, you deserved better. I understand your pain. I will repair what was broken. And while empathy matters deeply, no other human being can fully heal emotional wounds you refuse to confront internally yourself. This is why some people remain angry despite receiving apologies. Because the apology never reaches the deeper wound underneath. The nervous system still feels unsafe. Still feels abandoned. Still feels broken. Still feels emotionally unprotected. External validation cannot permanently repair internal disconnection. Only inner healing can do that. This is where radical emotional responsibility begins. Not self-punishment. Self-leadership. The willingness to say, what happened hurt me deeply. But I do not want to spend the rest of my life emotionally imprisoned by it. That sentence marks the beginning of emotional adulthood. Because emotionally immature healing says, fix me. Emotionally mature healing says, I will participate in my own healing. This changes the nervous system profoundly. The person stops waiting passively for life to restore peace magically. Instead, they begin actively rebuilding internal safety. Through self-awareness, therapy, boundaries, emotional regulation, honesty. Grieving, self-respect, nervous system healing. This process takes time. Especially after deep betrayal or trauma. But healing becomes possible the moment responsibility returns inward. Many people resist this because anger creates the illusion of protection. The nervous system believes, if I stay angry, I stay safe. But chronic anger rarely creates safety long-term. It creates emotional exhaustion. Eventually, the person realizes, I am tired of carrying this. Tired of replaying memories. Tired of emotional defense. Tired of bitterness. Tired of feeling emotionally trapped. That exhaustion often becomes the doorway to healing. Because finally, peace becomes more important than emotional warfare. Another painful truth emerges during healing. Closure is often self-created, not externally delivered. Sometimes the other person never explains themselves properly, never apologizes meaningfully, never understands your pain fully. Yet your nervous system still deserves peace. This realization is emotionally freeing, because it breaks dependency on external resolution. The person no longer asks, "Will they finally heal me?" Instead they ask, "How do I heal myself now?" That question creates power, real power. Not dominance over others, power over your own nervous system, your own reactions, your own emotional patterns, your own future. This does not mean isolation. Healthy people still seek support, therapy, connection, guidance, love. Healing is not meant to happen alone completely. But no external relationship can replace internal responsibility. Eventually every emotionally mature person realizes, people may support your healing, but nobody can do the healing for you. This truth is both painful and liberating. Painful because it removes fantasy. Liberating because it returns control. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the moment you stop waiting for other people to heal your wounds, is often the moment your real healing finally begins. Chapter 10. Letting go does not mean what happened was okay. One of the biggest reasons people stay trapped in anger is because they misunderstand what letting go actually means. They believe, if I forgive, I excuse what happened. If I move on, I betray my pain. If I stop being angry, then what they did was acceptable. So the nervous system keeps holding on to resentment as proof that the wound mattered. The anger becomes evidence. Evidence that the betrayal was real, the pain was real, the injustice mattered, and emotionally, this makes sense. Because wounded people often fear something terrifying. If I let go, maybe my suffering meant nothing. But healing never requires pretending the pain was acceptable. Never. Some experiences were deeply wrong. Some people truly caused damage. Some wounds changed your nervous system permanently. Acknowledging this honestly is important. Healing is not denial. Healing is not pretending betrayal felt beautiful. Healing is not becoming passive or emotionally naive. Real healing says, what happened hurt me deeply, and I no longer want to carry it inside my nervous system forever. That is very different. Many people confuse forgiveness with reconciliation, but they are not the same thing. Forgiveness is internal. Reconciliation is relational. You can forgive someone emotionally, and still never allow them close to you again. You can release hatred, while maintaining strong boundaries. You can stop carrying rage, without reopening doors that destroyed your peace before. This distinction changes everything psychologically. Because many wounded people remain angry simply because they fear losing protection. They think, if I soften emotionally, I will get hurt again. So they stay emotionally armored. But emotional armor often continues hurting the person long after the original danger disappeared. The nervous system remains tense, guarded, hyper alert, unable to fully relax, unable to fully trust, unable to fully experience peace. Letting go is not about trusting harmful people again. It is about teaching your nervous system, the war is over now. I no longer need to relive it every day. That is emotional freedom. Not forgetting. Freedom. There is another painful truth. Many people become emotionally attached to their suffering. Not because suffering feels good. Because pain became identity. The person no longer knows who they are without the resentment. Their story became, I am the betrayed one. I am the abandoned one. I am the wounded one. And while the pain was real, living inside the wound forever slowly destroys emotional aliveness. The nervous system stays trapped in survival mode. This affects relationships, health, communication, self-worth, trust, joy, emotional openness, Everything becomes filtered through unresolved pain. Eventually, the person stops living in the present emotionally. They live inside emotional memory. This is why some individuals relive old betrayals daily for years. The body continues reacting as though the event is still happening. The nervous system never receives permission to rest. Healing requires something difficult: the willingness to stop emotionally feeding old wounds constantly. Not suppressing them. Not denying them. But no longer building daily identity around them. This is where many people struggle. Because pain can become psychologically familiar. And familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar peace. Peace requires vulnerability, stillness, trust. And wounded nervous systems often distrust peace initially. Why? Because chaos became normal. Emotional tension became normal. Hypervigilance became normal. The nervous system adapted to survival. So when calmness finally arrives, it can feel emotionally uncomfortable at first. This surprises many people. They think healing will immediately feel peaceful. Sometimes healing initially feels empty, quiet, unfamiliar. Because the body became addicted to emotional intensity for years. This is why many people unconsciously return to toxic relationships. Emotional conflict, resentment loops, outrage. Emotional chaos. The nervous system craves familiarity, even unhealthy familiarity. Healing means breaking that cycle gradually. It means teaching the body, peace is safe too. That process takes patience, especially for deeply wounded individuals. Another important truth: letting go does not erase accountability. Healthy people still recognize harmful behavior clearly, still maintain boundaries, still protect themselves wisely. Forgiveness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. But boundaries without healing become emotional imprisonment. Emotionally mature people learn both softness, self-protection simultaneously. This balance creates real peace, not emotional weakness. Many angry individuals secretly fear forgiveness because they believe rage keeps them strong. But constant rage often weakens the nervous system over time. It consumes energy, sleep, focus, joy, connection. Eventually, the person becomes exhausted from carrying emotional warfare internally. This exhaustion often becomes the beginning of transformation. Because finally the person asks, how much longer do I want this pain controlling my life? That question matters. Because every day unresolved resentment dominates the nervous system. The past continues shaping the present. Healing begins the moment someone decides, I want peace more than I want emotional revenge. This decision is powerful. Not because the past changes, but because the nervous system finally stops organizing life around old pain constantly. And slowly, very slowly, the body begins learning safety again. The mind becomes quieter. The emotional tension softens. The person starts experiencing moments of calm without guilt, without needing anger to prove the wound existed. This is true emotional release. Not forgetting the pain, no longer living inside it. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: letting go does not mean the wound was acceptable. It means you finally decided the wound would no longer own your entire life. Chapter 11. Peace is a skill most people never learn. Most people know how to survive. Very few know how to feel truly at peace. Because survival and peace are completely different nervous system states. Survival is tension, alertness, defense, control, hypervigilance. Peace is softness, presence, safety, stillness, internal trust. And for many wounded people, peace feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. This is one of the strangest truths about emotional healing. After years of chaos, the nervous system can become afraid of calmness itself. Why? Because the body adapts to whatever emotional environment it experiences repeatedly. If someone lived through constant criticism, emotional unpredictability, betrayal, conflict, instability, rejection, survival stress, Their nervous system learns to stay prepared constantly. The body becomes emotionally armored. Even when external danger disappears, internal vigilance often remains. This is why many people struggle deeply in peaceful moments. Silence feels strange. Stillness feels unsafe. The nervous system keeps searching for problems. Conflict, rejection, emotional threat. Because hypervigilance became automatic, the body forgot how to rest psychologically. This creates people who are physically alive, but never internally relaxed. People who cannot fully enjoy relationships, success, rest, love, ordinary peaceful moments. Because the nervous system remains emotionally guarded, many angry individuals secretly believe, if I stop being alert, I will get hurt again. So they stay emotionally tense, constantly scanning life for disappointment. But chronic emotional defense eventually becomes exhausting. The body pays the price. The mind pays the price. Relationships pay the price. Peace is not passive. It is a nervous system skill. A learned ability to feel safe without needing constant emotional armor. And most people were never taught this skill. They learned achievement, performance, productivity, competition, emotional suppression, but not regulation, stillness, self-awareness, emotional processing, internal safety. This is why so many people appear successful externally, while feeling emotionally restless internally. Their nervous system never learned peace. Only performance. Only survival. Many people think peace means the absence of problems. But emotionally mature people understand, peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to remain internally grounded despite difficulty. That changes everything. Because life will always contain uncertainty, loss, disappointment, conflict, pain. No human being escapes suffering completely. But emotionally healthy people no longer allow suffering to dominate their entire nervous system permanently. They process pain instead of becoming pain. This distinction matters deeply. Unhealed people absorb suffering into identity. Healed people allow suffering to move through them without defining them forever. This is emotional freedom. And freedom requires practice. The nervous system heals gradually, especially after years of anger and emotional survival. Many people expect instant transformation, but the body changes slowly. The nervous system needs repeated experiences of safety before it fully relaxes. This means healing often looks ordinary, not dramatic. Small moments. Breathing deeply without tension, responding calmly instead of reacting instantly, feeling emotions without suppressing them, resting without guilt, speaking honestly without fear, setting boundaries without rage, experiencing silence without panic. These moments retrain the nervous system slowly. The body begins learning, I no longer need constant defense to survive. That realization creates enormous emotional change. One of the most important parts of peace is emotional self-awareness. Many people live disconnected from themselves completely. They notice external events, but rarely notice their internal state. They do not ask, what am I feeling right now? Why is my body tense? What fear is underneath this anger? What pain still needs compassion? Without awareness, the nervous system keeps repeating old patterns automatically. Awareness interrupts survival conditioning. This is why emotionally mature people spend time understanding themselves honestly, not obsessively. Honestly. Because unexamined pain controls behavior unconsciously. Healing also requires learning emotional regulation, not emotional suppression. Suppression says, do not feel. Regulation says, feel safely without losing yourself. This is a completely different relationship with emotion. Healthy people still experience anger, still feel hurt, still feel sadness. But emotions no longer completely control their nervous system. The body learns stability. Another important truth. Peace often requires grieving the life you never had. Many wounded people secretly carry grief for The childhood they deserved, the love they never received, the safety they never felt, the understanding they needed, the version of themselves survival destroyed. This grief matters. Because unresolved grief often hides beneath chronic anger. The nervous system softens when grief is finally acknowledged compassionately, not judged. Compassion is essential for healing. Many angry people secretly attack themselves internally constantly, calling themselves weak, broken, damaged, too emotional, too angry. But self-hatred cannot create inner peace. The nervous system heals through safety, not internal violence. This does not mean avoiding responsibility. Emotionally mature people still take accountability. But accountability without compassion becomes shame. And shame keeps the nervous system trapped in defense. Peace requires a different internal relationship. One built on honesty, patience, self-respect, boundaries, emotional awareness, compassion. Over time, the nervous system slowly stops expecting war everywhere. The body relaxes. The mind quiets. The person begins experiencing life directly instead of through constant emotional protection. And this changes relationships too. Peaceful people communicate differently. They no longer seek constant conflict, react impulsively, project pain onto others, build identity around suffering. They become emotionally present, grounded, safe to be around. Not because life became perfect. Because the nervous system finally learned how to stop living in permanent survival mode. This is rare. Most people never fully learn peace. They remain emotionally reactive for decades, carrying unresolved pain everywhere they go. But healing is possible. Not through perfection, through awareness, through repetition, through emotional courage. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: peace is not something you find once the world finally stops hurting you. Peace is what happens when your nervous system no longer needs suffering to feel prepared for life. Conclusion. The anger was burning you more than them for a long time. The anger felt necessary, protective, justified. Maybe it helped you survive moments that would have otherwise destroyed you emotionally. Maybe it gave you strength when you felt powerless. Maybe it helped you build walls after betrayal. Maybe it stopped you from collapsing under heartbreak. The anger had a purpose once. That truth matters. People are not angry for no reason. Every wound began somewhere. Every defensive reaction once protected something vulnerable underneath. A younger version of you was trying to survive emotionally. Trying to avoid abandonment, humiliation, rejection, grief, helplessness, emotional danger. And the nervous system adapted the best way it knew how. Through defense. Through emotional armor. Through anger. But survival mechanisms that protect us temporarily can slowly destroy us when carried forever. What once protected your heart eventually began exhausting it. The body became tired. The mind became tired. Relationships became tired. The nervous system stayed emotionally prepared for battles that already ended years ago. And slowly, the anger stopped protecting you, and started consuming you instead. This is the painful transition many people never fully recognize. At first, anger feels empowering. Eventually, it becomes heavy. The person carrying resentment often suffers far longer than the people who caused the original pain. Because the nervous system keeps reliving the wound internally every day. The body keeps preparing for emotional war. Again. And again. And again. Meanwhile, life keeps moving. Years pass. Relationships change. Opportunities disappear. Moments of peace are missed because the nervous system no longer knows how to stop surviving. This is the hidden tragedy of unresolved anger. It quietly steals presence from your life. You may still function, still work, still succeed, still smile publicly. But internally, part of the nervous system remains trapped in old emotional pain. This affects everything. How you love, how you trust, how you communicate, how you rest. How you experience yourself. Eventually, many people wake up emotionally exhausted. Not because life defeated them, Because carrying emotional armor for too long became unbearable. And strangely, this exhaustion can become the beginning of healing. Because finally, the person realizes, I do not want to spend the rest of my life fighting ghosts emotionally. That realization changes everything. Healing does not happen because the past suddenly becomes acceptable. It happens because the nervous system finally becomes more interested in peace than emotional warfare. This is not weakness. It is wisdom. The emotionally mature person eventually understands, staying angry forever will not undo the pain. It will only continue extending it. That understanding softens something inside the body. The nervous system slowly stops gripping the past so tightly. And healing begins quietly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Through small moments. Breathing without tension, responding instead of reacting, allowing softness again, trusting carefully, resting without emotional vigilance, feeling grief without turning it into rage. These moments matter more than most people realize. Because every peaceful moment teaches the nervous system, I am no longer trapped in the past. This is how emotional freedom develops. Slowly. Gently. Repeatedly. Many people think healing means becoming emotionally perfect. It does not. You will still feel anger sometimes. Still feel hurt. Still feel disappointment. You are human. But the emotions no longer own your nervous system completely. That is the difference. The healed person no longer builds identity around pain. No longer feeds resentment daily. No longer needs emotional suffering to feel protected. Instead, they begin rebuilding themselves around self-awareness, peace, boundaries, emotional honesty, compassion, inner stability. This creates a different kind of strength. Not hard strength. Grounded strength. The kind of strength that no longer needs rage to feel powerful. The kind of strength that allows softness without self-destruction. The kind of strength that says, what happened hurt me deeply, but I refuse to let it define the rest of my life. That sentence marks true healing. Because ultimately, emotional freedom is not about erasing the past. It is about no longer allowing the past to control the nervous system every single day. This is how people reclaim themselves after years of pain. Not through revenge. Not through emotional numbness. But through learning peace. Real peace. The kind that does not depend on validation, apology, revenge, control, external approval. The kind that exists quietly inside a regulated nervous system, finally learning safety again. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this. The anger you carried for so long was never truly destroying the people who hurt you most. It was slowly destroying the peace inside you.